I'm Faith Lumonya, and I work with SEATINI Uganda as a policy analyst in the area of trade and investment. And a lot of my work revolves around investment policies. And basically, we look at making investments work for people. So one of the things that we do within our advocacy is to say that we need to review the current investment policy frameworks, and these include the investment code. Fortunately, it was recently amended, and the only positive thing that we see that was addressed was that now it includes a requirement around environmental impact assessments, because previously it was not included. So there are certain investments that would actually be established without necessarily taking this into consideration, the environmental impact assessment. But one of the other things that we have always wanted included is something around human rights impact assessments, that when an investor is coming, one of the things they need to do is undertake a human rights impact assessment. They do it when they do the social impact assessment, but it's not as extensive because focus is on the environmental impact assessment. But also that aside from the human rights impact assessment, that even in their daily operations, they need to do what we call due diligence around human rights due diligence, that they need to keep reviewing their actions to ensure that they are not adversely affecting human rights. Investment and human rights was rarely put together. 20 years ago, you'd never have a discussion around business and human rights. We usually say business and human rights because investment is really about business, and it's really about maximizing profits. So often, it's not properly understood what the link is, but recently the conversation around business and human rights has become a hot topic, and it's because we are seeing that the way businesses do their business, the way investors operate, there are certain human rights that they are increasingly violating. So for example, when an investor comes and establishes in a community, usually there is a group of people who are living in that place. So for example, we know about Newman Cafe in Muvende. Before they established there were a number of smallholder farmers that were living and had a life in that particular community. But when they came and established, this community had to move. So in that case, there are human rights violations that, for example, that you find there was a blind child, a child who was born blind in that community, and they have mastered the different paths, the different dynamics of going around, say going to a borehole, going to school, and then now if you're saying they need to be moved so that you establish an investment and they are being moved to a totally different place, their human rights are being affected in that regard, and these are mainly those social rights. So there are those human rights, but then there are issues to do with the environment. There are labor rights. A lot of these companies establish, when they establish, they employ certain people, and there are a lot of human rights that are violated in that regard. Issues to do with low wages, issues to do with not giving them protective gear. We've seen women who have been unable to get maternity leave because the work that they do, they are paid on a daily. So if they miss out on a day, it means they are missing out on an income. So when we talk about business and human rights, we are saying, how do the operations of an investor affect human rights? We know of flower farms and the fact that within the operations of flower farms, they use a lot of chemicals that could be harmful to an individual, to the life of people. But one of the things that we have seen is that year after year, you find that the flower farms are using these same chemicals but they are not assessing the impact of the chemicals on the individuals that they're employing. Because we've seen, for example, a lot of women, and I'll give the example of quarries, the stone quarries, these people who blast stones. And we've seen a number of reports where, and I'll give an example of, there's a stone quarry in Gayaza, and this particular stone quarry was actually taken to court. These investors were taken to court by one of the NGOs that does human rights work, SEATINI. And one of the concerns that was raised was that a number of women were reporting that they were getting miscarriages because of the blasts that were happening. So, but these are operations that are done year after year, and they do not take time to assess how the community is being affected, how individuals are being affected. And those are some of the concerns that we are raising, that unless an investor recognizes that they have human rights obligations, that they have responsibilities in as far as human rights are concerned, then they will not take time to assess the extent to which their operations are affecting human rights, but also affecting communities. I think we've seen some positive where government has recognized that yes, there are concerns. So for example, one of the issues that we've constantly raised is about a provision within our bilateral investment treaties, what they call the investment promotion agreements, a provision around expropriation, which is defined very broadly to include even the indirect expropriation, that when government puts in place a certain law, say for example in this case the minimum wage, that there are companies that could decide to sue because they could raise concerns that their right to maximize profits is going to be violated. And there are a number of government officials who have indeed said that, for example, when you put in place a minimum wage, it could increase the cost of production, the cost of doing business. So there are certain businesses that could choose to sue the state for compensation. But also we've seen, and this even happened recently, where an official in the Ministry of Finance recognized that such a provision is actually detrimental, and that they are looking into finding ways of reviewing that provision, because it undermines policy space, the policy space of government to be able to regulate in the public interest. Yeah, so yes, we have seen that increasingly government is recognizing, but when it comes to the area of trade and investment, mainstreaming human rights issues into trade and investment legal frameworks, the progress is very slow, because government doesn't seem to yet understand why human rights should be included. But the reason is really to strengthen the obligations and responsibilities of investors when it comes to protecting human rights, because investors, when they come, for them they are only looking at frameworks that are pertaining to investment. So the Investment Code Act and the investment treaties or investment contracts that they deal with. So they don't look at the Employment Act, they don't know about Occupation Health and Safety Act, they don't know about the workers' compensation. But if reference can be made that within the investment code, they recognize that, and they include specifically that all investors must operate with reference to these different existing legal frameworks that protect human rights.